What I'm basically going to be talking about is the activity, pilot activity in Palm Beach County during the drug years, and what was involved, and it's a pretty fascinating story. It also concerns distribution of cocaine in Palm Beach, and I found out from the Palm Beach bookstores that people would come rushing in and grab the book and turn the pages real fast to see if they were in it, because they used a lot of real names, you know. And okay, so I came here in 1973, flew in from Arizona. Two things baffled me right away. One were these puffy white things in the sky, which they told me were clouds, because in Arizona, they're just at 25,000 feet and they're real thin. But, and the other was, I was going to Gardens Airport, which, as many of you know, if you might recall, was plowed under in the late 80s to become Palm Beach Gardens Airfield, which was cleverly made out of some substance that would shred your tires in about 2 landings, you know, shell rock and all. And so I landed there, and I landed right in the thick of a lot of the activity that was going on in 1973. At that time, most of the, in fact, all of the goods that were being flown into Gardens was marijuana. And it came from several stations, Norman's Cay, Great Harbor, and Gorda Cay, which is funny because Gorda Cay subsequently became Castaway Cay, and Disney uses it as a stop for their cruise ships, and people think how quaint it is, this fake old runway and this crashed plane, but that's the real thing. I mean, the aircraft went to several different places, but one of the major stops was Gardens Airport, because it was west of Military Trail, which was nothing. You know, it was just palmetto and scrub, and there was no police activity there. So the planes would come in, and if it was a heavy load, they would wait until nightfall, and everybody would unload at once. And the normal modus operandi would be that Colombian illegals would come up with trucks and vans and moving vehicles and unload and head south. Now, the interesting thing was that Gardens was ideally located because any activity by law enforcement was concentrated on vehicles moving north from Miami, because they just felt the stuff was coming into Miami and then it was traveling north. So they would stop vehicles and suspicious cars. But if you were going south with a load, there was no problem. So, for instance, one favorite trick would be a tow truck, and the paperwork would all be filled out because the Colombians owned the tow truck company. And there might be a milk truck up on top of the, you know, being towed, and that would be totally filled with marijuana, and it would then head south. So this activity went on. As I say, there was goods were sometimes dropped from aircraft, but really that's not such a hot idea, because if you have a low-wing plane, it's pretty much of a problem, and it's also hard with one person. So if you have another person with you, not only do you have to trust that guy, but he weighs maybe 180 pounds, and that's 3 or 4 bales, you know, quite a bit of money that you're throwing away if you. So most of the planes actually landed and unloaded. There was no fear at all of law enforcement, and this continued almost up until President Reagan declared his war on drugs. And the stuff that came in by boat sometimes was unloaded with the aid of the cops down in Miramar in Miami. And in fact, in I think 1982, the entire rookie class of police from Miami were either dead or in jail at the end of the year. So this was a typical aircraft, and there's some statistics here. Okay, this aircraft, which is what I had, if you take out the rear seats, all 4 seats, with full fuel, you still have a payload of 924 pounds. So that gives you a cruising speed of about 168 in miles per hour, held 83 gallons, and it would go 840 miles and still give you an hour of reserve. Now, here are the statistics and why it was such a popular pastime. The plane that we just talked about, typical Cherokee 6, would hold 18 bales of Columbia Red, street value $900,000, wholesale $350,000. The courier fee was $100,000. Now, that's a pretty good day's work. You had to pay your own gas and oil, but still, you know. Once the switch to cocaine, and now we're talking about going down to Columbia to get it, that plane would hold 44 kilos with a street price of $29 million, wholesale price of $12 million, and the courier made $1.32 million for the trip. Now, sometimes he doubled it, and I'll tell you why. Colombians had no use for dollars. Everything was in pesos. They bought governments, they bought everything they needed paste. It all was in pesos. But they didn't trust anybody to change the money. So the dollars were brought down to Colombia and exchanged down there. Now, assuming these are $100 bills, which they usually were, and they're dry, which wasn't always the case, a dollar bill weighs a gram. A $100 bill weighs a gram. That meant that the plane would hold $44 million of cash. So the courier fee there, which was 3%, was another $1.3 million. So if a pilot was clever, he could take the cash from Florida, fly it down to Colombia, and then pick up a load on the way back, and he made over $2.5 million in 2 days. Now, let me tell you the size of this business. At the height of the Medellin cartel, which later was superseded by the Cali boys, but they were bringing in $60 million per day, cash. And they had, there were warehouses all through Colombia with cash. And they had loss figures based on what the rats would chew up in the warehouses of hundreds. It was beyond belief. Pablo Escobar had more money than the Colombian government and a better army. And I guess you all know that was quite a bunch of turbulent years down there. This was the route that was taken from Santa Marta, which is on the northwest coast of Colombia, back to Florida with a stop off in Puerto Lempira. Now, and the yellow line is the Bahamas route. So it's a lot shorter from the Bahamas, but it paid a lot less. Now, a very interesting thing happened one day in Puerto Lempira. The snowman flew in there on his way down, maybe his way back, and there were a bunch of planes there with basically unmarked. He found out this was CIA. There were a whole fleet of CIA aircraft in there, probably because just to the south, Nicaragua was boiling over, and Somoza was stealing everything, and it was just a mess. So the CIA wanted to protect what interests they felt needed to be protected. Well, they ran into each other. And although the snowman had a pretty good alibi, he was flying medical supplies, he said, they contacted him after he got back to Florida and arranged a deal because they wanted to fly coke themselves. Now, this was in 1975, I think. In 73, the CIA had sold off Southern Air Transport. They no longer had the ability to fly, and the other planes they had just weren't suitable. So it was to their benefit to find somebody that could quietly bring cocaine in. And they used it for all sorts of nefarious purposes that I don't really know, but you can imagine, you know, bribing governments, people. I mean, it's the currency of crime and corruption. And that's who the CIA had to deal with. So he started running goods for the CIA. Now, he didn't get $1.32 million a trip, he got $10,000. So the snowman decided, well, if I'm only gonna get 10 grand, even though I'm doing a patriotic act, I probably can lift a kilo here or there. So he took a kilo out, and he lived in Palm Beach, so he had a garage tenant, and the garage tenant also had lived in town a long time. And make a long story short, the garage tenant was able to move this kilo of cocaine very fast in Palm Beach. Now, this was in the days when cocaine was not really being distributed on the island. And so the snowman pilfered another kilo on the next run, and then he realized this was quite a business. So he went down to Medellin and talked to a couple of the boys down there, and they agreed to pay him. He was getting $3,000 a kilo. So he upped it to $3,500, but he took the extra $500 in drugs, which was fine with Medellin because that wasn't real money to them, and it only seeded the market even further. So as much as he brought in, that's how fast the stuff got distributed in Palm Beach. And it was in all the nightclubs, it was all over the place, but never off the island. The island was kind of a safe harbor. Now, as you may know, there are more undercover cops in Palm Beach than almost anywhere in the United States, or maybe even the United States, but nobody never caught on, okay? So years went by, the battle grew. There were, excuse me, a number of incidents where one of the pilots almost collided with a helicopter who was on a rescue mission on a foggy night off the Straits of Florida. And at that time, Reagan had declared the war on drugs, so they were sending AWACS planes up, you know, with the big dish on top. And they were trying to track these guys without a lot of success. Now, in the early days, a pilot would just fly in at any altitude you wanted, dip down low as you got near the land, and come up over the coast, join the pattern at maybe Gardens, if that's where you're going. And so it looked like you just took off and came back and landed. And it worked fine. There was no way to be tracked, really. So that was the method that was used for years. The biggest danger, and I think the population has declined of pelicans, because I don't see them much anymore. But if you're flying at 100 feet or 200 feet, you do not want to hit a pelican, or anything really, but a pelican's gonna, you know. So that was one of the biggest worries the pilots had, was hitting a pelican. So, okay, time went by, Reagan declares the war on drugs. They start giving out really heavy sentences for being caught. Most of the guys, the heavy hitters who you saw in the picture, Cocaine Cowboys or Blow, were caught and sent off to prison. The pilots were largely untouched, and the violence didn't touch the pilots either, because they were valuable commodities. I mean, to Colombia, to Medellin, a pilot who could be trusted was worth his weight in cocaine, because that was the lifeblood of the supply. So pilots were always treated very well. They weren't really at risk, but you did not want to disappear with a load, because then your family would disappear. And that happened in Central Florida to at least one pilot, who they later determined actually crashed in the Gulf, but Medellin didn't care. You know, had to set an example.